Economically, I believe we're in serious trouble. The economy is going down and down in GDP, and I'm very worried about it. More important than that is the economy is bifurcating. Some businesses on one side of the street are doing very well. Some businesses on the other side of the street are doing terrible. And what it really comes down to is what I've been saying for decades, is it's which side of technology you're on. Because we've got this animal out there, called COVID, that operates and changes all the rules. It's as if we flew to a planet where there's no more gravity, there's no more sunlight, it's pitch dark. What are you gonna do?
That iconic meeting that took place on Jekyll Island, which was a private club in Georgia where all of these bankers went to get out of the public eye. They created this thing called the central bank or the Federal Reserve System in secret, because if the public had known that the reform legislation was written by the bankers, they would never have gone for it. There's a real name for that kind of an arrangement, and it's called a cartel.
I think every single person should be taking 10% of their take-home income and automatically placing that into some sort of a long-term investment and learning as much about business and advertising as possible. The hack, if you will, to creating income on demand is by having an audience. Even if it's a few hundred people who actively digest whatever you put into the world, we can turn that into enough money to do damage.
Welcome to episode 5 of Money Revealed 2020. Wow, this is going by kind of quick, isn't it? We just started and launched this thing in episode 1 not that long ago. Now we're halfway through episode 5. So we're in the free viewing period of our 9-part docuseries. And let me tell you, it doesn't slow down. It actually gains momentum episode by episode. We have a wonderful array of experts, brilliant people with terrific information that we're going to be bringing to you. Also know that during this free viewing period, which we're about halfway through right now, we have significant discounts on owning Money Revealed 2020. On this page, take a look. We have different packages, different bonuses that come with them. We give you great incentive and rewards for owning this series if you do it during the free viewing period. So now is the time. Take a look. I encourage you to jump in. It's exciting. It's great stuff. It's something that you'll revisit it over and over again. It's a phenomenal success library that not only is for you, but the people that you care about most. So right now we have episode 5. We have some amazing interviews for you. Take a look at this information. If you don't have a pen and paper, you need it. Go grab that right now, come back, hit the play button, and let's go. Before I ever met him, I was a great admirer of Paul Zane Pilzer. He was an economic advisor to 2 U.S. presidents. He also had an amazing career as a serial entrepreneur in various parts, various industries, not all just in one place, but in many different realms. The way his mind works is quite unique. You'll see that he's a brilliant guy. This 2-part interview is going to take a look at what's going on in the world right now. In the past, I've interviewed Paul many times, and it's been amazing how well he's anticipated what's going to go on in the economy. He's called it right. So I was excited to sit down and have a conversation to see what he thinks with what's going on economically in the world right now and what he looks at in the future. So you're going to get a look into his crystal ball. This is a 2-part interview, so enjoy part 1 of my 2-part interview with Paul Zane Pilzer. Paul, here we are once again. So great to be with you. We interviewed you for Money Revealed, the original one, some time ago. We then had a conversation in Crisis Investing 2020, and I got a lot of very pleasant communications from people thanking me for doing that interview with you because it made them a lot of money. and what you recommended, just to recap, this is when COVID hit, the market was down at about 19,000 a Dow, and you said, I just took a multi-million-dollar loss as a capital loss, so I have it as a tax break against gains, and then you can buy back in and ride it back up. And you predicted back then, and we have the tape, so we're not trying to look like we're making fictional news here. You said that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, and you explained why you thought it would be a V-shaped recovery. It's exactly what it was. And now here we are, much later in 2020, for an updated conversation around what you see going on now. So just in case somebody didn't get to see any of the prior interviews who's watching this, can we just do a quick background on you and your work as an economist and entrepreneur?
My background is really multiple careers that have run parallel. I graduated Wharton Business School with an MBA and thought I was going to go for a doctorate and even a law degree at Penn, and ended up going to work at Citibank. So I had an amazing 5-year run at Citibank, working directly for the senior officers at Citibank, and that introduced me to all types of opportunity. While working at Citibank, I went in to quit a few times, and they would talk me out of it. And after my second year, they said, I'm going to go, I want to teach. And they couldn't talk me out of teaching, so we made a deal that I could teach at New York University every Monday night, and Tuesday morning, and then go to Citibank the rest of the week. And that became my life for the next few years, actually 21 years. So for 21 years, I taught every Monday at NYU.
What were you teaching?
Teaching originally finance and then all economics. And that's when I started writing books. So I was teaching at NYU for 21 years. I was starting to write books as an economist and giving lectures. I worked at Citibank for the first 5 of those years. And then I left Citibank and went on my own as an entrepreneur and went into the White House. So for the 21 years I was at NYU, I was stationed from Moscow, a lot of work in China, lots of fascinating projects for Washington, and also managed to put together some real estate deals in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, in Czechoslovakia, and of course the United States. So I really was an entrepreneur, mostly real estate development, a economist, writing books and working in the White House, and a professor. I love teaching.
So maybe for reference points, people would say, what books? You've written several books.
11 books.
11 books at this point. I've read, I don't know if I read them all, but I read a lot of them. And Unlimited Wealth was one that impacted me before I ever met you. And I know that you also have spoken on platforms like for Tony Robbins and,
Unlimited Wealth is painful for me. It was well received. It was apolitical. It was well received on both sides of the aisle. People could like you then, regardless of what president you worked for. And the comment I often get today, Pilzer, isn't he that Republican guy who wrote Unlimited Wealth? Has he done anything good since Unlimited Wealth? So Unlimited Wealth has sort of become my magnum opus. And I hope to beat that with a redo of it, which I'm writing right now, called The New Roaring '20s.
And we'll talk about that because I remember pre-COVID we had the conversation about your perspectives, and I'm wondering if what's going on now in the world, if your view on these new roaring '20s is going to change. So let's start maybe high level. So now we're much deeper into 2020. There's all this polarizing political environment going on. COVID is still a reality, a lot of controversy around that. What is your updated view economically?
Economically, I believe we're in serious trouble. But I'm going to qualify that. The stock market's going up. And the stock market will continue to go up, as I talked about when the last time we met 6 months ago. Normally, that's a conundrum, because the market should reflect in the stock of the companies what the opportunity is in the marketplace, in the economy. The economy is going down and down in GDP, and I'm very worried about it. More important than that is the economy is bifurcating. Some businesses on one side of the street are doing very well, or at least well, or better than they were before COVID. Some businesses on the other side of the street are doing terrible. And what it really comes down to is what I've been saying for decades, is it's which side of technology you're on. And when I first met you, are you making CD-ROMs or are you making cassette tapes? Well, you better put your stuff on CD-ROMs, on CDs, and move it all into now virtual. So it's you bet on technology in any platform or any business you go into. At some point, you're dependent and enjoying the rewards of that technology. guess what happens? The technology changes. And how you deal with those changes and deal with those platform changes determines whether your business is going to succeed or not. So we find very similar to fashion. You make short skirts, you make long skirts, and you take a bet each year. I grew up in the garment business, and I would watch my uncles and relatives take a bet on one particular area of fashion or the world, and then make a lot of money or lose a lot of money based on where they write. And technology is pretty much the same. What we're seeing in COVID is everything that's been happening in the last 10 years is still happening, except it's happening at 5 to 10 times the speed. Because we're retooling so much of our economy in COVID, because we had robots, that's what my new book's about, ready to step in. So we have unlimited labor. Before we never had labor to match. They had zero. You went when the economy took off. You went from 5, 6, 7% to 2, 3, 4% unemployment. Well, today we're headed towards unemployment might be 20, 30, 50%, but the economy is soaring in sales of certain businesses that can use robots to make the pizza instead of labor. You start to see that we're on new uncharted territory, almost as if we went to another planet where I drop a ball and it doesn't fall because the rules are different.
Right.
The rules of economics post-COVID are different and changing so fast. And changes that used to happen in 5 to 10 years are now happening in 1 or 2 years because people are implementing new technology so quickly.
I need you to explain something to me because I don't understand it. Why, if GDP is declining, is the market going up? How does that, aren't they supposed to be sort of related to each other? Not in an inverse way?
Theoretically, yes. But what we have happening now is no place to put the money. You think the market's going down. You think bonds are 0%. So you sell your asset and take the cash. What do you do with it? There's very little places to put it. Before, the fixed income market, bonds, mortgages, were a good, safe place to put it. And you get less return. But you got 5%. You got 4%.
Right.
Now we're seeing a fixed income market from an investor standpoint of effectively zero. You buy bonds, you get a return of 0.
Wow.
Why do you get 0? Because there's so much money around. And the Fed has said, but if it ever went down, we're committing for the next few years or indefinitely to pouring money out there.
Where's the money coming from?
The money is coming from people selling things and having a huge, huge surplus supply of money. So they go to buy a bond. And remember, the price of a bond is inversely proportional to its interest rate. Suppose there's a bond, an instrument that yields you 5%. I go, hey, I'll buy that and earn 5%. And you say, I'll buy it at a higher price, which only yields me 4.5. Another guy shows up 4%. Overnight, these rates have been bid down to 0 in the free market. That's before we get to the Fed priming the pump and printing money.
So are the interest rates, so this is interesting, so are the interest rates at near 0 or 0 because of the bidding war, or is it because of the Fed's policy?
So the bidding war is just supply. There's too much money. Money from the private sector selling what they have to liquefy it and put it somewhere. And they're worried, so they don't want to put it in equities, they want to put it in bonds. Well, they bid the price of bonds so high. Then you've got the government committed to printing money as we need it and handing it out to people. We don't want a revolution, and I don't mean that as like a one-liner. I mean that serious, violent revolution. And what we're doing very well is, as we did under the original COVID PPP and stimulus package, is we're handing out $1,200, $1,000 checks to people, and we're saying, please spend it. Because you were, and how do we know you're a good guy and should get it? You paid taxes last year. So we took everybody who paid taxes electronically back in March, and we sent them checks for thousands of dollars per person in their household. And that stimulated the economy. That kept people buying rent. Now comes the scary part. We're no longer giving people cash because we're worried about inflation and other areas we need to manage. We're telling people no foreclosures. Sounds simple. You won't lose your house. We'll have a no foreclosure rule. But what happens when the guy who owns the building, the landlord, can't pay his utilities, can't clean the building, can't have security? All of a sudden, the building falls apart and everybody's evicted, not just you.
Right.
It's a very scary environment.
So
And
commercial real estate is like in big trouble right now.
yes and no. There's 2 different theories. I play this out in commercial real estate because I sit on the board of some very large real estate investment funds. And in real estate, we don't know what's right, what's wrong. For example, in real estate, there's a theory that everybody's going to work from home. And when they work from home, they won't need any commercial real estate. So the demand for real estate is going down. There's another theory that people are going to work in the office are going to need twice as much space because of social distancing. So you need double the space because of social distancing, but you need half the space because I'm working at home. I don't know. It's really what is your industry, what's best for your customer, what's best for your model. We no longer can say buy REITs because real estate's going up or the real estate's going down, because we've got this animal out there, call it COVID, a living thing, COVID, that operates and changes all the rules. It's as if we flew to a planet where there's no more gravity, there's no more sunlight, it's pitch dark. What are you going to do? I don't know what we're going to do, but that's the environment we as business people face right now. There's so much uncertainty, and it's uncertain for each business differently based on what are their suppliers and where are their customers.
You mentioned about printing money, infusing it. Is there a concern that you have about the devaluation of the dollar? I mean, you're printing money out of thin air. There's no GDP against it. It's just so what happens economically?
Well, everything's relative. So yes, we're printing money, and the GDP is not going up like we'd like it to. Against it, you might say, the substance of that value, and we're worried. But ultimately, people have money not just in the U.S. in this world, but in the rest of the world. Where are they going to put it? If things get really bad, and by really bad I meant countries start turning socialist, what country do you think is going to be the last one to turn socialist? United States. As much as we complain and we fight and argue in this election year what's going to happen and what should happen, we know we're the strongest when it comes to political stability. Now, I mentioned political stability. What about military stability? I mean, this is a great time for people to do very bad things, who want to do very bad things or take somebody else's country over. What country do you think militarily is going to be the last one standing if there's a real world war or crisis? Not a doubt. The United States. Our men and women in our military are so much better and so much better equipped than any other country in the world. So if things get very bad, the U.S. is going to be standing. Now let's summarize. We're saying the U.S. is the most powerful militarily. We're saying that the U.S. on political stability, on a relative basis, is the most politically stable. That means people are going to want to invest here. So as the world starts to slip, the accumulated capital of the world makes its own stampede. And the stampede is to the Treasury window in Washington that every Friday sells Treasury bills. They're dying to give us and lend us money from around the world. Both governments want to do that to preserve their money, and most important, well-to-do individuals in every country want to invest their money now in the United States to sit this out till they're ready to go back and invest and build up France or Indonesia or wherever else they live.
So is supply and demand economics at play here? If all that money's coming in from other currencies, and they want to invest in this country where the currency is the dollar, that raises the value of the dollar, in essence, in a relativistic.
And it really has raised it in real terms. It's not just artificial. It's not like we're not producing things. They believe that their money is safest in the United States. We're like the bank of last resort for everyone in the world, or the bank of first choice for someone who says, I don't want to invest money to make money anymore. I just want to keep what I got. And if you get into that kind of mode, all roads point to the United States.
Is there a danger of there being a run on that bank, so to speak? Meaning, as you said, oh, hey, you know what? The world's calmed back down, everything's good, and people will go and take all their cash back out that they put here for safekeeping?
Fascinating, as you always are, Patrick. You make me think of things I hadn't thought about. Just as we lived through a run in the bank, starting with It's a Wonderful Life movie scene that I used to teach banking. Is there a danger to people all at once withdrawing it? Yes, but here's the good news. Since 1971, we went off the gold standard. Nixon did that for us. That means when they come running for their money, I'll go, oh, excuse me, I got to go back and print some more. Crank the presses, here's your money. And here's an IOU good for a few days till I print the certificate for you. But we do this electronically. So because we're no longer committed to give them back gold or pieces of land in Arizona or wherever else, there really isn't a danger of a run because we'll just print it. Now, theoretically, that should lower the cost value of the dollar when we print a lot more. But again, that's a relative value compared to other countries. It's one of the things that, there are things that keep me awake at night. This doesn't keep me awake.
Yeah, because in some respects, many people who study this are very concerned about saying, you keep putting trillions of dollars, into an economy out of thin air that, those dollars don't represent value creation.
Those trillions are buying us political stability. They're buying us, you want to see some real riots? How about a riot over economics? Nobody survives.
Well, which leads me to another question now, because You talked about a bifurcation, and you're saying you have businesses that are either on the right side of technology or the wrong side of technology. That's kind of a line of demarcation, which I think in and of itself is probably an entire interview. We might want to do sometime and dig into that. But what about also the wealth gap that's forming? Does that concern you?
That keeps me up at night.
That keeps you up at night.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was waiting to say that, and you took the words out of my mouth. That keeps me up at night. We are dealing with people who are unemployed that there are no jobs for them. We're building more robots, not more machines that they can operate. And it used to be we were building machines that would employ people on the auto line. We trained them, and they'd have a job. Now, God bless them, we don't build machines, we build robots to run the machines. Right? You don't even see the robot. The machine does everything automatically, it sees things. I see this with my kids building robots for school as their top subject and top subject in college. And the robot business makes the people who build the robots and design them wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And it takes away even the hope that the economy will turn around and somebody unemployed will get a job. I base a lot of my work on a 1927 letter to my grandchildren written by the world's most famous economist, John Maynard Keynes. And in his letter to my grandchildren in 1927, he said, in 100 years, and everyone laughed, who's going to be around 100 years? Here we are.
Yeah.
2027 is coming up real fast.
Yeah.
In 100 years, he said, only 1/3 of the population will be employed. And they'll work an average of 15 hours a week. Now, when he said this, they had child labor. Everybody worked. So it was almost 100% of the population was working at that point just to survive in 1927. And when he said this, it seemed crazy. Well, today we have a population in the U.S. that 50% of the people work. Between the people off having children, the people who are off studying in colleges, 60 million. When you add them up, the actual labor force of our country is about 160 million people over a base and population of 350 million. That's 50%. That's incredible. So we already went from 1/3 employment to 50% employment. And we're heading towards a level where there are no jobs for people, and we'll clearly reach, within a decade, I believe, his 1/3 employment.
Did Keynes have a solution?
Keynes said that the people who make work, who do work, the 1/3 of the population, are going to use machines and technology and be so efficient, tons of money. And that's what he came up with. One of the obvious things you'll do is tax those people, or those people will support someone else. Now, but they might be supporting their spouse. They might be supporting their kids getting a PhD and loving it. They might be supporting a kid practicing for theater and he doesn't care if it ever gets produced. He just wants to sing and practice. It's a good life. So Keynes really pinpointed that a small amount of the population, 1/3 in his model, would support everyone else. We're already at 50%.
It's interesting because you see the unemployment reports, they're talking now like around 8% or so, but that's the way they're calculating that isn't a raw figure of total population versus people working.
If you haven't had a job in 6 months, we used to call you unemployed. Now we say if you haven't had a job in 6 months, you are not looking, whether you are looking or not. We call them the discouraged. And I have a whole chapter in my next book called The Discouraged. And the discouraged is now a legal economic term used by the U.S. Treasury for people who haven't had a job in 6 months. They're no longer on the unemployment rolls. What they look at is the people who lost their job and haven't found one in 6 months, which in today's technology world is probably all of us, because we don't have the technology to run the new machine. That's why we lost our job, and the guy at the other company kept his job. He kept up with the new technology. And so we're seeing that people who are unemployed more than 6 months are no longer counted on the rolls. But let's look at it the other way. 160 million people work in the United States, and that's part and full time, and 350 million is the U.S. population. Duh, that's 50% employment.
Wow. So do you think that universal basic income is inevitable given these dynamics?
Absolutely. We already have it in families. Our form of UBI is you taking care of a relative, and I'm close enough to know who those relatives are, or you watching me help out certain relatives in older populations that I know. But there are people today in today's world that don't have a grandparent living, or a parent, or a child to support them, etc. And we need to widen our net for everyone. So universal basic income is already here within family units and within close-knit groups, within churches. They know who needs the help and take care of them. Now we're about to see UBI extended to the people who don't have a family member. Not going to make them rich. We're talking $1,000 a month, $1,200 a month total per person from all sources. But it is going to keep them from killing the person next door over food. or going to keep them when they've served their time for a mistake they made and went to prison. And then we dump them back on the street without any method of eating. We say, you can't have food stamps, you're not married, you got nothing there, and we're going to expect you to live an honest life. No, we have to give a basic amount like universal basic income or not let somebody out of jail.
Yeah, the motivations get interesting because obviously, if you're talking about somebody helping out a relative, et cetera, that's a voluntary thing as compared to it being involuntary and
Right.
The government mandating it. But there's, I guess, two ways to look at this. One is saying, oh, this is the humane thing to do in a society that's blessed with such abundance. The other thing, though, is saying this is a way you prevent riots in the streets and people from killing each other.
In all my examples of universal basic income, giving money to someone on the street who doesn't have money, you and I never met and it's in a different state, you and I benefit. We're benefiting from giving somebody a hand up, not a handout. And there's so many mistakes we've made in the way in which we've been giving the aid or assistance, what someone might call UBI. We haven't been giving universal basic income. We've been going to rich people who make food and say, include this in the food stamps eligibility, so you buy my food. Oh, it's not as good in the market, that's why I need the food stamp to cover it. People would never buy this with their own money.
Right.
And we start to see building low-income housing projects. I wouldn't live in a low-income housing project where every father had abandoned their children, but you'll give it to me free, I'll go live there. In effect, we don't give out assistance, we give out things that we buy to poor people. We need to be honest about this and say the rich people's desire to build more low-income housing or the rich person's desire to give more food stamps, sorry, you don't matter. What matters is the beneficiary of that. And we need to switch that to dollars. So I come up with about $2 trillion of $4 trillion in a government budget that we no longer should give out things, we should give out dollars and let them figure it out and how to spend it. And they might say, gee, I don't really like my mother anymore, but I'm willing to live in her apartment to save what I was getting in free rent in a public housing project. Now I'll get it in cash and I'll use it to go to learn a trade, or I'll use it to do something else. I won't waste it. It's a very inefficient system we have now that gives out aid of things and claims it's aid by its dollar value, as opposed to giving out dollars and let the consumer make their own choices.
That concludes part one of my two-part interview with Paul Zane Pilzer. As you can see, he's brilliant. He's been around long enough to understand that when things get a little weird in the economy, what can we anticipate, what we can look for. His perspectives about what's going to happen over the next 10 years, I find fascinating. You want to tune in for part two. There's a lot more, and he's going to inform you in ways like no one else can. So great to be with you right now. Make sure you show up for part two of my interview with Paul Zane Pilzer. When I heard I was going to be interviewing G. Edward Griffin, I had a lot of anticipation. This is a man who wrote a book that had a massive impact on me. He's written several books, but one of those books was The Creature from Jekyll Island. He's sort of iconic. There's this whole subculture that really follows him very, very closely. He sees the big picture. He understands how the system is rigged against us. So this is an interview that you want to pay close attention to. Let it sink in. Understand this perspective, and it's going to pay dividends to you in the future. Enjoy my interview with G. Edward Griffin. Ed, I'm a big fan of your work, so I've been anticipating and looking forward to this conversation, so thanks for taking the time.
Well, it's a pleasure to hear that, Pat. Thank you very much.
So your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, I read several years ago, and I was mesmerized by it, and also kind of shocked as far as its contents and what it revealed or exposed. So let me ask you this. What got you started to want to even write that book or approach that project?
You know what, Patrick, it's like so many things in life. If you knew where you were headed, you probably wouldn't take that path.
Right.
I thought I was going someplace else. And I really didn't have an interest in the Federal Reserve. Back in the day when I was very young and I was trying to make a difference in the world, the one thing I had had a little experience with as a very young person was media. Mm-hmm. I worked in a television station. I was an assistant director, floor manager, and all that stuff. And I took speech and communications at the university, and I had a radio program and all that. So I thought, this is what I do. So I would put the communication skills that I had learned to work and tell people what I was learning. Well, that came a little bit later. You see, first when I came out of school, I thought I was going to be a big splash in Hollywood.
Right.
That's why the world was obviously waiting for me. And so when I got there, it was a really rude awakening. I discovered that there were a lot of people there with much better talent than mine. And they were waiting tables and washing cars, waiting for their big chance. But this time I had married my childhood sweetheart, my college sweetheart. She was the prettiest nurse on campus. We had a child, and we were, on the road. And all of a sudden I was running out of money. And nobody cared about me. It was a really rude awakening. So I went to work for a large corporation, and I was doing well. I was climbing the corporate ladder and all of that. So my life had shifted to now, okay, I'm in the real world now. Not this Hollywood stuff, but the real world. And it was in that stage, I was about 5 years with this corporation. I was, thinking about what I was going to be and how high I could climb the ladder, and I'm going to be a vice president, and I'm going to have all these nice material things and provide for my family and all of that, like most young people do. And then I began to read some stuff and hear some things about what was going on in the world that upset me. And I didn't know I had one, but my crusader gene kicked in. And all of a sudden, these things that I thought were important began to fade. And I began to think about, well, wait a minute, this beautiful country, which I was born into, which I thought would always be here because that's the way it is, I realized that it was had some problems, and that there were people who didn't want the way it was. They wanted to change it to something else. And the deeper I got into it, the more alarmed I became. And this is when the crusader gene kicked in, is I had to do something about it. And so, make a long story short, I quit my job.
Wow,
My poor
just like
wife
that.
almost. That was, what are you doing? How are we going to live? So I thought, well, look, I know these skills. I'm going to start producing some little documentary films. And at that stage, I decided that I wanted to do something on inflation. I didn't know anything about it, except I thought there was a lot of nonsense about the cause of inflation. Nobody really seemed to know. They were pointing the finger at the other guy. And I thought, this can't be true. So I started to do some research and got some boxes full of papers and books and recordings. And I interviewed some people, some bankers and so forth. But then there was a group in Pasadena, typical little old ladies in tennis shoes in Pasadena that you may have heard about. And they had a study group on taxes. High taxes, okay. And they called me. They heard I was giving speeches, and free speeches at that. So they wanted to know if I would come and speak to their group about taxes. And I told the ladies there, I said, well, well, the one lady who was in charge of it, I said, well, I don't know much about taxes, but I might have something on a hidden tax. She said, well, what's that? I said, well, that's what I would talk about. Well, they went for that, of course, and so I came and I talked about the hidden tax called inflation. And of course, you don't do any research on that at all without getting quickly to the source, the engine of the inflation, and the expansion of the money supply. And that's the Federal Reserve System. So that's where I was at. That's how I sort of eased into it. I had no intention of becoming any kind of an authority, except I had my box full of papers and research, and I could talk a little bit on it. Well, the group was so impressed by it, and they said, oh, that was wonderful. You ought to take that on the road. You know? Well, the one thing you don't say to a budding young public speaker is take it on the road, because he will take it on the road. And so I did. I started to put on some seminars called A Crash Course on Money. And they were well attended, and we were having, we felt that we were doing some good, teaching people about the basics of money, inflation in particular, how to protect yourself against that, and so forth. And increasingly, though, people asked me at the end of these seminars, in the Q&A period in particular, they'd say, well, my husband died some years ago, and we have a small estate, and I don't know what to do with the money. Should I buy an apartment building? Should I buy gold or silver? Should I get out of debt or go into debt and get income, so forth? And I discovered at that point that I was a fraud because I didn't know anything about that. I knew about inflation and how the central bank worked and the Federal Reserve, but these were real-life questions about the market, and I knew nothing about it. So I stopped doing the seminars, and I enrolled in a school, College for Financial Planning in Denver, Colorado, which was, I didn't want to become a financial planner. That was not it. But I thought, if I'm going to talk about this topic, I ought to know about the real world of markets.
Right.
So I went through that and got my designation. And then I was getting very serious about this topic because I was learning more as I went. The best way to learn about something is to try and explain it.
Right. I agree with that.
Because then you realize where your holes are. You have to go and fill in the holes. So by this time I had filled in so many holes, I felt I really should write a book on this. That point was the beginning of a 7-year project of research and writing.
Wow.
So I quit the process twice. It was the dark night, you know.
Yeah.
I said, this is too big. There's too much. I'm inadequate to do this. I'll never finish this. So I quit. But there was something in me, that crusader Jaron, who said, no, you can't quit. So I went back and I finally finished it. So if I had known how long it would take and how much effort it was, and so many years with really jeopardizing our family, because when you're writing, you're not making any money, you know. So that's how I got into it, and I'm glad I did, of course. And it seems like all of the projects I've gotten into have been along similar paths. They zigzag around, and I've discovered talking to people that most of us have traveled those zigzag paths in our lives.
Yeah. So was there a certain point in time when you were in the research part of this book and you're writing it, that where it was like an aha moment, like, oh my God, there's something that seems, somewhat conspiratorial here? Or was it just incremental, like it just kept building on itself? Was there like that flashpoint where it's like suddenly, wow, this is not what I thought, and it's a story that needs to be told?
A little bit of both, Patrick. I think, first of all, it was basically incremental. But there were two little flashpoints that happened that I can think of right now. The first one was when I realized that the Federal Reserve System was created in secret, under conditions of extreme secrecy. There are very few wars in history that were launched under conditions of greater secrecy than the Fed. And I was aware that, you don't do things in secret unless you have something to hide. And that was the thing that caught me and kept bringing me back to that iconic meeting that took place on Jekyll Island, which was a private club island in Georgia where all of these bankers went to get out of the public eye. And they spent a week creating the Federal Reserve System in this private place in Georgia on an island.
And what year was that?
That was 1910. Yeah, and so that idea of what were they trying to hide kept drawing me to it. I knew there was something important because it was more than just the history of how this thing came about. I began to realize that I was dealing with not the dull story of banking and discount rates and the history of who did this and so forth, but it was like a whodunit. And so that was my mission, is to show who did it and how they did it and where they buried the body and what it means to you and to me. So that was one aha moment. And the other aha moment came many moons later when I finally got near the end of the project and I began to get very nervous about the idea of putting my work out into the world to be scrutinized by people who would disagree with me.
Right.
Many of whom, of course, were far more qualified than I.
Right.
They were, professors, they were teachers, they were academics, they were bankers, they were business people. And they had all of these credentials, and I thought, oh, they're going to chop me up in little pieces, I've made a lot of mistakes, I'm sure. But it was a certain point right at the end, and I began to get into debates with some of these academics. I thought they were going to tear me apart on radio and so forth.
Right.
And the second one came when I walked into a radio studio, and I've forgotten where it was. It was back on the East Coast. And I thought it was going to be an interview on my work. But instead, there was a guy sitting on the other side of the table, and he was introduced to me as Professor so-and-so from the local university, and that this was going to be a debate. Oh.
No time to prepare.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to be unmasked,
right.
as a fool.
Right.
So I thought, okay, here we go. So the first part of the program was, well, Mr. Griffin, would you tell us what you have found and what your theory is about all this? So I made my statement, and I think I had about 2 or 3 minutes to summarize it. And it was not very kind toward the banking system. And then, well, Professor so-and-so, what do you say to that? I was waiting on the edge of my seat. And there was a long pause. And he said, well, what you say is true, but we're living well, aren't we?
That's the response?
That was the response.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was the moment I knew I had hit the bullseye.
Right.
If the worst thing they could say is that, well, everything you say is true. It's okay, yes, we're cheating people. Yes, we're financing wars. Yes, we're destroying the system. Yes, we're all these horrible things, but we're living well, aren't we? That was it.
That would be a pivotal moment.
Yeah, it was pivotal.
So let's review some of that then for people maybe who aren't familiar with the story. And I was curious too, who documented that meeting in Jekyll Island? How were you able to find out who was there and what they talked about? Because it was a secretive meeting.
Well, Patrick, that was a lot easier than you might think because they documented it themselves.
Right.
Now, in the beginning, there was a lot of secrecy, as I said, and they didn't talk about it openly, but they were keeping their diaries, and their families knew about it. And later on, after the Federal Reserve was actually formed and was becoming an iconic, popular institution, wonderful American institution. Then they began to speak openly about it. Say, yes, we really went there, and this is what we did. And they seemed to be competing with each other in a way as to who was the most important person in this. Yeah. In the beginning, though, they denied that there was any such meeting that took place.
Really?
Yeah. So it was, and then of course they started to write articles about it and give speeches about it.
Right.
And one of them wrote a book about it, and their historians recounted the story as told by the family and so forth. So there are a lot of very credible sources now, mostly original sources, that are in the public libraries if you want to dig for them. I found almost everything I needed in the public domain. I went to Jekyll Island and found some interesting tidbits in their archives. They make no bones about it. You can go to Jekyll Island now, go to the clubhouse, and there's the picture on the wall of all these guys. And on the door that goes into the room where they held this meeting, it says Federal Reserve Room.
Wow.
And there are their pictures, and it's sort of, hey, this is where the Federal Reserve was created, you know?
Wow.
Well, of course, they don't go into the idea that they were trying to hide something. It's just that isn't it nice that these famous gentlemen were here and members of our club.
Right.
So
let's talk about what were they trying to hide, and what was the real intention behind the formation of the Federal Reserve, and how has it impacted our lives through those generations since?
Well, we're going to skip over a lot of old history about the evolution of banking and all of that. We come fast forward through all that vital information so you can really appreciate what's going on today, because this isn't the first time. Everything that's happening today has happened before in history. So what we find is that prior to the Federal Reserve System, there was, you might call it banking chaos in the United States and around the world for that matter, but we're talking about the U.S. Each of the states had created official state banks. And in the process of creating these banks, the states gave them permission to do things that were really unethical.
Right.
Under the promise that, well, we're going to regulate them to make sure that these unethical and these otherwise illegal things don't hurt anybody.
Right.
Because we, the trustworthy politicians, are going to be watching this, so don't worry about it. And what am I talking about? Basically, what they gave them was the power to create money out of nothing and to charge interest on nothing. And they gave them the power to imply, and in some cases openly state, that they were holding reserves of the depositors, holding them, and they called them demand deposits, which meant that you could come in and demand your money because it was there.
Right.
When in fact that was a lie, because they had taken that money and they had loaned it out, and it wasn't there at all. You could not demand it. The first 3% that got there could demand it, and they got it, and the rest were, we don't have any.
Right.
And they were allowed basically to lie about that. Now, that's not how the language came out. You know, you read it. It was written by lawyers, so it sounded pretty good. But in essence, there were things like that existing in all of the state banks, and so consequently the banks were expanding the money supply based on loans. and not cash deposits at all, which made them very precarious when there were runs on the bank.
Right.
And so the banks had to close their doors. People lost their savings because of this basically an unethical arrangement that existed. It would have been different if they had said, well, we're going to loan your money out so you can't demand it.
Right.
And maybe we'll lose your money too. But they didn't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be secure there.
Yeah,
That's
secure.
why you bring it to a bank.
That's
yeah.
the bank. It's secure. You know, they didn't realize they were lending their money to speculators.
Right.
And not, I mean, bankers are speculators.
Right.
And so that was the situation. A lot of banks were failing, and so there was a national movement to reform banking in America. And so people wanted to have Congress, their elected representatives, step up as their defender and pass a law that would control these big bad bankers and prevent these runs on the bank and all the loss of savings and all that. So the banks, the biggest banks, especially in New York, which dominated the whole scene, decided that rather than wait for a real genuine response from the public to reform the banking industry, that they themselves would get at the head of the parade.
Right.
And they would be the leaders of the cry for banking reform. And that's basically what happened, but they didn't want the public to know it. They wanted to control both sides of the debate. So the biggest bankers of them all were the ones that drafted the Federal Reserve Act, which was supposed to be to control the banks. So the banks themselves, the biggest violators, the biggest cause of all the public alarm, decided that they would draft the reform.
Right.
To reform themselves, of course.
The fox is guarding the hen house, basically.
Fox is going to build the hen house, install the security system, and guard it. Yeah. But they didn't dare let the public know that they were the ones creating it. That's why they had to go away from Washington, D.C., and they didn't allow any politicians. There was all the bankers. That went,
no politicians run
No
Jekyll
politicians.
Island. Okay.
There was an assistant secretary of the Treasury who was there. Why was he assistant secretary of the Treasury? He was a banker.
Right.
In real life, he was a
Right.
banker. So they were all bankers, you see.
Yeah.
And they created this thing called the central bank or the Federal Reserve System in secret because if the public had known that the reform legislation was written by the bankers, they would never have gone for it. It's that simple.
So in essence, they're saying they're trying to self-govern rather than have the government govern them. They'd get together and do it themselves, but they're conflicted as far as how they would govern or what rules there would be. So what were some of the outcomes that have had these downstream adverse effects?
Well, first of all, your observation is correct. They wanted to self-govern, but that's kind of a gentle way of describing it.
Yeah.
There's a real name for that kind of an arrangement, and it's called a cartel.
Yeah, that's another one I've heard.
Yeah, and that's really what they formed.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve System is a cartel of banks. In essence, it's no different than the oil cartel or the banana cartel or any other sugar cartel.
Right.
You get all the producers together, the big producers, and they decide to form an industry-wide association. They regulate themselves, and if they're really smart, which most of them are, they bring the politicians into it,
Yes.
and they take their cartel agreement and they pass it into law.
Right.
And they call it reform or to protect the people or give it some nice words.
That also can be known as collusion.
It's collusion. Yeah. In other words, they use government to enforce their own private cartel agreement.
Right.
And we see that happening all the time. And of course, the Federal Reserve is one of the most major examples of that. But we see it in healthcare. We see it in the utilities industry. We see it everywhere you look. These are cartels that bring the government into it and make it look like they're serving the people because government's involved. But in fact, the governments are serving the private interests.
Right.
This is an important thing to understand.
Very important. Very important. So now it's formed. It comes into existence. And it's sort of interesting because it's not a government agency.
Not at all.
It's a private
Yes.
entity that is under government I guess, would you say regulation or review, or what is the accountability of the Federal Reserve to the government?
As I said a moment ago, they take their cartel agreement, they take it, in our case, to Congress. Congress stamps it, says we vote for it, now it's law. So now you and I have to abide by the rules of the cartel or we go to prison.
Right.
Because it's law. And because we go to prison, if we violate it, it makes us think that, well, it must be a government agency because only government can put you in prison, right?
Right.
Well, not unless the agency has been captured by the private sector, you see. Now it's not that way at all. It's upside down the other way. So that's really what's happening. It's not a government agency, but it appears to be a government agency because it has the power of government to enforce it. And that's what makes it hard for people to understand. It's got to be government, doesn't it? And it's not at all. It's a private banking cartel.
And who were some of the key people that were there at Jekyll Island?
Senator Nelson Aldrich, of course, he was the first one. He's the guy that owned the private railroad car, by the way, where all these guys got into a private railroad car in Hoboken, New Jersey, and they traveled for 2 nights and a day up down the coast to Georgia, and they got off and they went across the inland straits to Jekyll Island.
Now, he was a senator. Was he a sitting senator or a former senator?
Oh, he was a sitting senator.
Okay, so then there was a politician there, I guess.
He was a politician.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but he was a banker.
He was a banker also.
Well, he's a close business associate of J.P. Morgan and William Rockefeller. This was his financial base.
Right.
He was more of a businessman and a banker than he was a politician.
Right.
You see, but nevertheless, he was in charge of the Senate commission that was given the responsibility to come up with a proposal of banking reform. So he was just the perfect guy for it. He's a business partner with the biggest moguls in the world.
Right.
And so he selected the right people. He went to Europe and he went on a fact-finding mission and all that kind of stuff. But he knew exactly what he was looking for.
Were all the people there Americans, or were there some Europeans at this meeting?
No,
also?
at this meeting they're all Americans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
This is very much an American institution. Now you get into some shady stuff where we know that there was foreign money involved. We know that the Rothschild banking dynasty was very interested in and very probably financially involved in this, although it's hard to find out. You know, they don't publish those records.
Right, right.
But we know that the firm of Kuhn Loeb and Company was represented, and they represented the Rothschilds in England and France, and then there was the Warburg family in Germany and in France, I believe, and they were represented there. So we know there was financial interest from outside, but all of these people were associated with the Morgan Bank or the Rockefeller Bank. In fact, the Morgan Bank had 2 people there, and one was the investment trust, and one was the banking industry. They were the biggest members of, the public called it the money trust. You know, it was fun because during those days we didn't have the internet when I was doing research.
Right.
So a lot of this stuff I had to get from the Los Angeles Library. And so where you find it there, these big boxes, they're microfilm readers. And you get these rolls of microfilm of 35 millimeters wide.
Right.
You bring them in and you turn the crank and the light comes down and you're looking at all these pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post going whizzing through you. Zing, 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 zing. It's like you're a god and you're looking at the history moving by. You know, zing, zing, zing. And every time I could spot an editorial comment coming along, it would be, break the grip of the money trust. Zing, back it up. Oh, yeah, there it is. The cry over and over again was, break the grip of the money trust. So the public and some of the politicians of the day were calling this the money trust. And this was what this legislation was supposed to break. And yet here were the members of the money trust being the ones writing the legislation. So who was there? All the representatives of the money trust. There was Abraham Piatt Andrew. He was the one who was apparently the Assistant Secretary of the State, of the Treasury rather. But he has an interesting story. He was one of the guys that went to Moscow on behalf of the banking interests literally with suitcases full of money.
Wow.
During the Bolshevik Revolution. And they were buying up the revolutionary movement.
Wow.
They actually were probably the major financiers of Lenin.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's one of the implications that saying, you know, that these bankers and the Federal Reserve, you know, by proxy, are the profiteers of wars when they occur.
Of course.
Because these wars have to be funded, and where are they going for the funding?
Yes.
So is that one of the major implications?
Well, it's one of them. You bet it is, because this was a formula that was developed by the Rothschilds in Europe long ago. They found out that financing both sides of a war, both sides, was very, very profitable, because no matter which side won, you got your interest.
Right.
And it was outrageous interest, because when you're a ruler of a country, you don't care what it costs to win the war.
That's right.
Because you're going to get the money from the people eventually. Right. Interest rates are not important. It's get the money.
Right.
So you can hire the armies, build the factories, get the munitions, and so forth. So war is very, very profitable.
And it's interesting because war is funded by private dollars then in that respect.
Yes.
And there are profiteers of wars when they occur. It's not just, the government's saying we're gearing up. The funding's coming against funneled from that place. I don't think most people recognize that.
No, I didn't recognize it either till I got into that study. So there's so many layers to be exposed when you dig into the power of money.
Yeah.
You know, it's when you think about it, money is at the heart of almost every transaction in human experience. And that doesn't make money bad. Money merely happens to be serve that function. Money can be used to serve good as well as evil,
right.
But it sure has been used to serve evil purposes.
So has the Federal Reserve, through its actions and the research that you've done, has it somehow turned us into like these indentured slaves or servants? Does it keep us in a predicament that causes us to constantly feed at that monster?
That's a very harsh way of putting it, but Patrick, I would say it's a very accurate way. I mean, when you clear away all the gentlemanly language to it, we become indentured servants to this system. Because I've seen various numbers over the years, and I don't know which is accurate, but here's what I'm driving at. People have attempted to find out how much of our lives do we spend earning money that goes to taxes and interest on loans. Now, just in your own mind, I don't know what that number is, but I'm sure it's over 50%.
Well over, for sure, yeah.
Half of our lives, and it could be well over that, because there are a lot of hidden taxes we don't know about. And interest on loans, when you think, you build a house and so forth, and let's just say the house is worth, just take a round figure, $100,000. And you subtract the value of the land and the value of the building materials, the nails and the wood and the shingles and so forth, and the labor, and you put all that up, it's going to be in the range of about $30,000, and all the rest is interest on money that didn't even exist when it was loaned.
And does this tie into inflation? And
that is the engine of inflation, of course.
So this is the engine of inflation, and as you're saying, so inflation is almost a tool used by the bankers to kind of perpetuate their scheme here.
Oh, it's definitely a tool. it's a great mechanism.
Can you
to
talk
extract.
about that a little bit?
Well, sure. First of all, what is inflation? It's just the expansion of the money supply at a rate greater than the expansion of goods and services that offset it. Now, if money was something that took human effort to produce, like gold or silver or anything else that people have to make with human effort, then the quantity of that money would expand or contract the same way any other good would expand or contract, depending on the demand for it.
Right.
Because there would be the motive for people to produce it. They'd go out and dig the gold out of the ground and refine it. So it's hard to do.
Right.
So that is why whenever in history, when money was gold or silver, and there only been a few little narrow pieces in history where that's happened, but in those periods of history, the purchasing power has remained constant, very constant over thousands of years. But when you break the money supply away from human effort and just say, well, let's vote on it.
Right.
How much money are we going to create now? Then, no surprise to anybody, the supply of money goes up and up, because especially when the banks create more money, that means they can lend more money, that means they can collect more interest on their loans, and that's how they make their profit, is on interest on loans. And so if you restrict the amount of money that a bank has to lend, you're restricting their income. That's why banks always say gold and silver is a terrible thing. We've got to have a flexible currency for you folks. It's for your own benefit.
And this is the so-called fiat currency,
The
where
fiat
it's not
currency,
tied to anything.
Not
yeah.
tied to anything.
Right.
It's just this formula that you decide. Let's make it 3-to-1. Oh, how about 4-to-1? No, 9-to-1. You know,
Right.
you vote on it.
Right.
So when the supply of money does increase, as it always does in a fiat system like that, at a rate faster than the supply of goods and services, then naturally the individual units of the dollars buy less and less of it.
Right.
And so that's inflation. It's not really hard to understand. And the only way to prevent inflation is to limit the money supply or gear it. And the only way you can really limit it is to gear it to something that takes human effort. If you say, well, we're just going to be disciplined and we're going to be really good guys and we won't increase the money supply, then it doesn't work.
I've never seen that discipline.
There aren't that many good. There aren't that many good guys out there when the temptation of huge money is.
But now, what this means to me as a worker in that system, so and a producer and a taxpayer, is that if I work and I accumulate, some amount of money or wealth, and I'm holding on to it, saying, "Hey, I want to earn and compile." Mm-hmm. But now these people can just sort of, like you said, raise their hand, vote, an increased supply, and suddenly this money is devalued. So all this work, and I've already paid taxes, I've already done all the other things, the interest rates I've had to pay, and next thing you know, I'm sitting here saying, "Geez, I don't have much left. Who got this money? Where did the value get transferred to?
Yeah.
If I had this much money and it had this much value on a given date and time, but then the value of that money got transferred out of my possession and into somebody else's, and that's sort of the perplexing thing. And I think what you've identified is that got transferred, that wealth got transferred to these bankers.
Exactly. It didn't just disappear.
No,
it didn't go up to heaven.
Right.
It went to the banks,
right.
to the bankers, and to the politicians, who were the first ones in line for the benefit of that, because they're the ones that get the first flood of money. Mm-hmm. It's usually called a loan or something like that. So they raise the national debt.
Right.
And like when they bail out the banks, that's an interesting subject. We may come back to that.
Yeah, well,
The banks are really bailing out themselves, but they got to get Congress involved to approve it. Yeah. But anyway, so when they create these billions and billions of dollars, just like raising their hand, where does that go? It goes to the banks.
Right.
Or it goes to some corporation, worthy corporation. Why? Because they owe it to the banks.
Right.
That's why the only reason the corporations are getting these loans or these bailouts is so they can continue to pay interest on their loans to the banks.
Right.
If it weren't for that, nobody would care about corporations. Right. It's always, this is a system of the banks, for the banks, by the banks, and of the banks.
So the whole thing is rigged.
It is rigged, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I said your statement a moment ago sounded a little bit rough, but it was pretty accurate.
Wow. Well, it's highly disturbing because obviously these are somewhat complex issues, and they're not really taught as a part of the regular education for the average American that's going through the educational system. Matter of fact, the educational system was designed to turn these people into factory workers to go to work every day to keep feeding this inflationary system that benefits these bankers, and then of course when all else fails, a good war will do, right?
It's an excellent fallback. Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes as I get deeper understanding, when I was reading your book, it made me kind of sense that like I feel like a hamster on the treadmill, and I'll keep running faster and faster, but I'm never getting off.
Well, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea. I published a little chart you may remember. I looked at these numbers and I thought, what did they mean over a lifespan? A little 3% inflation a year doesn't sound bad. 4%, 4.5%, 5%. Okay, we'll hold it at 5%. That doesn't hurt anything, does it? And yet, when you track that on a chart and you go 5% this year, 5% including the previous 5%, and project it out, over the working span of the average person, over about 60 or 70 years, over the lifespan of an average person, these people have stolen 97% of everything you have saved
Wow.
over a lifetime.
Wow. And that's it. And you saved after taxes.
After taxes, yeah. If you put that in, they probably get it all.
It's really somewhat incomprehensible, and in a sense, we're boiled frogs, right? We're born into it, so we don't really question it.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's just the way things are.
The way we don't question it. Exactly. That's what they want. That's why we don't have a monetary educational system that teaches all these things.
Right.
They teach the kids how to borrow responsibly. That's the way. I saw an ad after the crash in 2008. All the banks were begging for money. All the banks were bankrupt. And the Bank of America, I think it was, put an ad on television. They had the audacity to offer a booklet to young people how to borrow responsibly. And they were the worst people in the world to be talking about that because they were bankrupt.
Yeah, that's a bit hypocritical, wouldn't you say?
That's like a whiskey company saying, drink responsibly.
And they try to do that in commercials
They do
sometimes.
that. They do that. And we're not supposed to know this.
We want to sell as much of this as we can, but we want you to be responsible. It's pathetically humorous.
Yes.
Wow. So now the idea, though, is people say, well, we couldn't function without a Federal Reserve. So if you could wave a magic wand and make the Federal Reserve disappear tomorrow, what does the world look like?
Well, the world would look a lot better than it does now. Now, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be some problems because, unfortunately, we've just said that nobody understands money. They don't understand these basic issues, and so there would be chaos. Not because the system was changing for the better, but because people wouldn't know how to live under such a system.
Right.
That's the basic problem. It's up here. It's
Right.
not in the wallet so much. So what it would look like is that banks would continue to do just about everything that they want to do, with one exception. They wouldn't be allowed to lie. They wouldn't be protected
Right.
by the government.
Right.
They wouldn't be bailed out. They would be treated like any other business.
They'd be accountable.
To be accountable, yes. That's all that would be required. We don't have to get rid of banks. They serve a great function. If they didn't have this protection to be deceitful and to rob people. That's all.
Are there any practical measures people can take to sort of compensate for the predicament that we're all forced into with this Federal Reserve, as far as how what they can do with their money, how to maybe mitigate the appropriation of their money, of their hard-earned dollars that should be theirs?
To try and protect themselves a little bit from this chaos that we see around us. Well, yes, there is. I look at this in a sort of a two-phase view. There's the short term and the long term. In the short term, we can't think about changing very much because this is we need to turn the locomotive around and head back the other way. But right now it's going down the track with a lot of momentum.
Right.
And we know we got to slow it down and then maybe back it up. You can't just bingo, stop it. So for a little while, we're stuck on this train moving in the wrong direction. So what do we do under those circumstances? Well, the first thing is to recognize that the national currencies of the world are fiat currencies. They're not backed by anything of intrinsic value. Therefore, they will inflate or they will deflate in their purchasing power and prices will inflate.
Right.
So since we know that, why on earth would we want to keep our savings and our wealth in national currencies or anything that represents national currencies? It's insane.
Right.
So the first logical, intelligent thing to do is take whatever wealth, little bit or a lot, we may have, anything over and above our daily activities with a little reserve for bumps along the road, and get it out of fiat currencies. That doesn't mean I'm giving any advice as to where to put them because I'm not smart enough to know what's best for you or anybody else. But there are any place else would be better than having them in currencies that you know that every day with every tick of the clock it's losing its purchasing power.
Right.
So it's like standing on the train track and we see the headlight coming. Folks, first thing to do, get off the track.
Right.
Then we can talk about
That makes a lot of
some of these
sense.
other things.
Yeah.
But the question of what do you do with the money is not so easy, and that depends a lot on the individual. The only general rule of thumb is it should be something that has intrinsic value that people want and that will last a long time.
Right.
And of course, now you're getting into the evaluation of what is the good form of money, because anything can be used for money
Right.
if it has intrinsic value and
Yes.
so forth. You might consider buying gold or silver. Of course, then you have to worry about who's going to guard your gold and silver.
Right.
So every investment opportunity you can think of has its challenges. There's
And
no
those markets
perfect-
can get manipulated too.
Everything gets messed up easily
yeah,
by the experts. And so whatever, I'm glad you brought that up, because no matter what you do, you better become an expert on it yourself.
That's right.
Don't depend on somebody to come in and tell you what they're selling.
Right.
Now, they may be perfectly reputable, honest people, but they're going to be biased in favor of what they know or what they have to sell.
Right.
It might be real estate. It might be a warehouse full of cheap white wine. I don't know. But I mean, everybody's got to figure that out for themselves. But get off the track, because fiat money is going down, down, down every day.
Yeah.
Now, that's the short-term view. The long-term view is more challenging, because I don't think there is any way that we can survive in the long term unless we change this system.
Right.
Eventually, this creature is going to grow and grow and grow and get a bigger portion of our lives and a bigger portion of it until finally they have it all. So if we're not willing to just sit back and say, well, let's live as best we can while in the time we have left,
Right.
a lot of people take that view. If you have that crusader gene that I have,
Right.
and you have,
Yes.
and many people have, you can't just sit here and take this. You've got to do something. Well, that means we've got to change this system. We've got to become active. We've got to become responsible in the political field. We have to talk about it to our friends. We have to create a movement based on understanding, and this isn't easy.
No.
But we have to do it.
No, well, that's Revealed Films' statement of purpose is we make movies that make movements, and that's the
it.
whole point.
That's the whole point.
Is that kind of activism, I think, is required, and there has to be a reckoning at some point. I mean, it's funny when I talk to people and friends of mine, even that are economists, and I talk about the debt, and they're like, the debt's no big deal. I'm like, $20 trillion, well, look at all the wealth that we have, and the wealth's going to expand, and, servicing that debt is only this much money. I said, what happens if interest rates go up? Oh, that could be a problem.
Yeah. So they're saying everything you say is true, but we're doing well, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. That's that response. Look how well we're doing.
Look,
But it's not the point.
we're doing great.
My kids are born there. A portion of their life, a large portion, is already mortgaged before they're even brought into the world.
Yeah.
And so nobody looks at that as being a morally criminal thing, to do to a human being. So to me it's very disturbing. Now I have another friend of mine, wise person who's been around a long time, and he would say, as I was getting some projects, he said, sometimes you got to be careful whose rice bowls you're going to break. And in your case, you really called out very publicly a lot of very powerful people who have very large rice bowls, so to
Yes,
speak.
yes.
What was the backlash for you after the release of this book?
Well, it wasn't nearly what I thought it would be. I thought that I would probably come under a lot of attack, and I overestimated my ability to reach a lot of people. I know how the opposition works now, and if I'd thought about it, I would have realized that what happened, which was not much, was according to formula. These people with the big rice bowls, as you say, they do have a formula. And you can spot it over and over again. And the first thing is that if they have opposition, they ignore it. And 9 times out of 10, that's all they have to do, because it'll go away.
Right.
They have the money, the power, the media,
The influence.
and you have just an idea, or maybe a book or something like that. But if nobody reads the book, you're a flash in the pan. You don't have the resources to continue and pose a serious threat. So they just ignore it. It goes away. So that's the first thing that happened to me. They ignored me. I thought, well, isn't this interesting? I got kind of upset by that. Like, come on. What?
You were hoping to get the attention, and they're smart enough not to give you the
They're
attention.
smart enough not to do that. Now, the next phase, of course, is on their part, is to demonize, And I have begun to see a little bit of that happen because they will try and, as more people get this message, my message and yours too, they will demonize us. They'll say, well, those people are racists, or they're crackpots, or they're fascists, or they owe taxes, or they
Conspiracy theorists.
They molest little children. Or they have these conspiracy theories, ha, 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 things like that. And unfortunately, many of the people in the world will believe it because they read it in the newspaper.
That's right.
And that's usually pretty effective. That eliminates most of their opposition. I don't know what lies in store for me, but my crusader gene will not allow me to stop. All right? I know what lies ahead, and foolishly I'm trying as hard as I can to put me a little closer to the target. Because if we don't win this war, it won't make any difference. It won't make any difference. We'll lose everything. So we have no option. We have to fight, and we have to win.
So, any final thoughts that you might have before we tie up, as far as what you think people need to know that we haven't spoken about?
Well, I don't know whether it's a final thought. It's just another thought, and that is that we talk about problems in the world. We talk about problems in the monetary system. Everywhere we look, we've got, oh, look at this. This is horrible. This is happening to us. We're living in a really wonderful time right now because in spite of all of those problems, we have the means of communication and research to discover what they are, and with the ability to get organized and build movements, as you say, we can create a movement to actually reverse this if we really want to do it. And the encouraging thing is we don't need a lot of people to do it.
No.
I, at one point, had the view that we had to reach 51%, right? The Democratic view. We win the vote, and then we can do anything we want to. And then I got a little smarter as I started to reread history. I recognized that history has always been determined by a minority, and an extreme minority, 3% or less.
Right.
It's certainly true in the American Revolution.
Yep.
Less than 3% were active in the revolution. Most of them were waiting to see who was going to win.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to say, but it's true.
Yeah.
And even those that were in the revolution weren't quite sure what its orientation was. It was just a small group of people like Jefferson and Adams and Madison and Washington who set the pace. It was probably less than 20 people, 20 people in the continental area of the United States that were the leaders and motivators of the whole American Revolution. Right. So, and probably 1%, the farmers out there were fighting and willing to sacrifice, put their lives on the line, but they were following their leaders and so on. This is the way society really works. So all we have to do, Patrick, is reach that little 1% or less of the population who are willing to dedicate their lives to this thing and put the story out in a plausible way, in a reasonable way to explain it and to show the pros and the cons. And then larger numbers will follow along. Yeah. You know the old song, give me some men who are stout-hearted, and I'll soon give you 10,000 more. Right. That's how it works. Right. And so that's the encouraging part. We're living in a great period of history, and we have a wonderful opportunity with the tools of communication that we have to really make a difference in the world.
Well, I appreciate you lighting the torch here and helping to make a bigger dent in that 1%. And your work has been something that has made a difference in a lot of lives, in a lot of people's lives that you'll never know or never meet. But I'm happy that I'm one of the ones you didn't know that I've met you today. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you. When I grow up, I want to be G. Edward Griffin. Isn't it amazing? Decades and decades of a career. And he gets up every morning. He still has that twinkle in his eye. He still has an excitement and a zest for life. He is writing still. He is out there promulgating his ideas. It doesn't seem like anything's going to stop this guy, including age as the years go by. Really inspiring to be with him. Thanks for joining me and letting me share this interview with you. When I heard about I'd be interviewing the guy who owned the website capitalism.com, I imagined it would be a pretty interesting interview. And then I found out it was a pretty young guy, at least relative to me, it was a pretty young guy. Ryan Moran is very energized, sort of speaks like an older person, but is a young guy with fresh perspective who's doing big things in the world. This interview is something that will stimulate you, energize you, and hopefully give you some insights around things that maybe you're not thinking right now that can serve your financial future. Enjoy my interview with Ryan Moran. So Ryan, great to have this conversation. We want to get more practical now. Strategies, what you see is working is for people in entrepreneurial careers or seeking entrepreneurial careers, or even side hustles, saying, hey, I have my normal job, but here's something I'm trying to look for something on the side to expand my income, et cetera. And you said you've got a lot of passion around this, so tell me some of your thoughts regarding those issues.
Yeah, this is my jam, you would say.
Uh-huh.
So in my work, I basically help people create a plan to get them their first $1 million business, and have helped been a part of several hundred successful businesses that have either resulted in people selling their business or making it their full-time thing or a side thing. And the first thing that we have to identify here is what we spoke about previously of disconnecting the idea of time worked versus money earned.
Right.
Because ultimately, as Jim Rohn would have said, or did say, we're compensated for the value we bring to the marketplace. It takes time to produce value, but we're not paid for the time. We're paid for the value that we bring to the marketplace. Right. And we do that by doing things that create a scalable impact throughout the rest of the world or our world. So one of the ways that we've done this at capitalism.com is through physical products brands. The kind of aha formula that a lot of our students say is when the light bulb came on, is if we have 3 to 5 products selling 20 to 35 units per day at an average price point of $25 to $35, that's $1 million business. Okay. And we could run those numbers a couple different ways, but 3 to 5 products selling about 30 sales a day is about 100 sales a day at an average price point of about $30 is $1 million business. And that $1 million business is usually when we have something we can either scale or something that we can sell. And I believe that the fast lane to financial freedom is to build a business and invest the profits. And if I were to say the faster-ish lane would be to build a business and sell it and then invest that for passive income so that you can define life on your own terms. And for some people, that means you then double down on another business.
Right.
And for other people, say, I'm done. I'm going to now do what I would like for a few years. And either one is totally cool because you're responsible for the results that you get and the way that you pursue happiness.
So I want to talk about the blueprint that you have for this, but before I do, I'm gonna fast forward to one of the things you just said, and then we'll go back. When you say that, okay, because let's say I'm a dentist, I'm 50 years old, I've accumulated a good amount of money, but I want side money, or I want to be able to create passive income. Maybe I'm starting to look toward retirement, and I don't want to just retire my capital and burn it. I want to figure out a way to use that in a way that works in today's world where it can provide me passive income. What are some of your suggestions around that?
I think every single person should be taking 10% of their take-home income and automatically placing that into some sort of a long-term investment.
Okay.
So for me, that's just, I have E-Trade deduct a certain amount from my checking account every month, and I go and I put that into dividend-paying stock. Now, I would say I am like in step 3 of the process because I've built a business, I've sold businesses, I've invested for enough passive income to where my life is taken care of, and now I'm investing for really long-term wealth. Right. For some people, if you don't have that side business that is producing some sort of exponential return, that's the first investment that I would make to someone who is entrepreneurial. Okay. So if somebody was set on staying in their job and just doubling down on their career, I would say, okay, that's gonna be your source of income. Let's go to step 2 and invest for passive income. But for the person who doesn't want that life, or they want something on the side, or they want the thing to replace their job, I'd say that 10% of your take-home pay needs to be being set aside for that side business that is going to ultimately, hopefully, create the income that's going to replace the job that you're working. And the number one thing that you can be doing with that 10% is to be in education and learning as much about business and advertising as possible. So I think that the hack, if you will, to creating income on demand is by having an audience, is by having people who pay attention when you distribute information to them. And that can come in the form of a YouTube channel. It can come from a podcast. It can come from a blog. It can come from people reading your Facebook posts. It can come from an email list. It can come from Facebook Messenger. It can come from Twitter. It can come from Pinterest. It can come from Instagram. We can go on and on and on forever. So if there are people, even if it's a few hundred people who actively digest whatever you put into the world, we can turn that into enough money to do damage. And to get to that first few hundred, it'll take a few dollars. And by a few dollars, it could be as simple as $500 or $1,000 for us to put something onto a channel, advertise it to people who would benefit from it until we have a few hundred or a few thousand people following our work on Facebook, Instagram, our blog, on and on forever, wherever you're putting your content. That audience is your hack to creating income on demand. And we can go into how to do that, but that is like absolute foundation, step one of how you create a predictable income stream that is not tied to anything except the value you're bringing to the world.
Let's go ahead and dig deeper then, since we're on it. So go ahead and talk about that a little bit more, as far as saying, okay, maybe like kind of give a scenario. So you got this person, here's the amount of money they have to invest, and here's the process.
Yeah, so if somebody has, I was asked once, if I have an extra $500 a month, what should I do with it? And I'd say I'd put it all on advertising whatever content you're producing in the world. So if you are a dentist and your passion is dentistry, and you want to have a business that serves other dentists, then you need to be putting out content for other dentists and advertising that on whatever platform you are most comfortable distributing that content. And a lot of people will debate over the best place is Pinterest, the best place is Facebook. No, it's Instagram. Now it's Snapchat. Some people will say do all of them. I say do whichever one you naturally do. Because you're going to continue doing that. So for me, I will sometimes write blog posts when I feel inspired. That usually happens on planes or when I'm super relaxed on vacation. But give me a microphone or a camera, I'll talk all day. Proof. So if there's a camera or a microphone, I can produce content all day long. So that's why I have a full-time videographer. Now, I didn't always have a full-time videographer, but I did always have a $30 microphone that I plug into my laptop, and I start communicating ideas about business and investing to the world, and I spend a few $100s a month to boost that content. That would be step one at its foundation, how we're going to get this ball rolling.
And to be clear, the content you're giving, it's a giveaway, it's free content. What you're paying for, or investing in, I should say, is to build an audience.
That's exactly it. Because there's a deposit into a relationship bucket, Every interaction that you have on the internet or in person is ultimately a value exchange. And your job at the beginning is to start depositing checks into that relationship bucket from the people who are following you. And if your content is halfway decent and you're targeting the right people, the people who would benefit the most, a few hundred or 1,000 people is enough to get the ball rolling in terms of monetization. And I would say you want to make the deposits in the relationship account as long as possible before you ask for a withdrawal. But for most people, at about 1,000 followers, that's when we could start to monetize it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that if somebody say, well, if I were to take that $500 a month and put it into a stock or put it into something else, first of all, it's then out of your control in the sense that it's now you're investing in somebody else's stream, not your own. But then secondly, the return on this investment is likely much higher if you build that audience and get it to that 1,000+ mark.
My first successful physical products brand was a sports nutrition company called Sheer Strength. I ordered my first line of product for $600. And I sold that for more than $10 million. A majority stake for more than $10 million. I still hold a minority stake, which will probably be another 8-figure payday at some point. That's a pretty good ROI, right? That is better than Bitcoin. That is better than any index fund, right? I mean that only happens because you are now investing sweat and education and intelligence and time into something that is going to create an exponential return.
Now, there's a dimension of this. Did you have personally a passion in fitness products?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how key is it that you're passionate about whatever it is that you're looking to promote as compared to saying, I think, oh, that's a good idea, even though I'm not that emotionally invested in what it is?
Passion is an asset. It's not a necessity. Passion is an asset in a field of assets.
Right.
Time is an asset. Money is an asset. Connections are an asset. An audience is an asset. Passion is an asset.
Okay.
And all of these things make results happen faster, or they open up opportunities, or they give you the grit to keep going.
Right.
So talking about this with you is energizing for me. It's a passion of mine, which means at the end, I'll probably be sad it's over. Right? Since this is my work day.
Right.
But at the end, I'll be sad that it's over. I'll want to keep going.
Yeah.
Which means if another interview showed up, I would want to participate in it.
Right.
So that's an asset because it means that I can contribute more. It means that I can do more work because I've got more energy to do it. Now, for some people, all they have is money, but they have no time, or they have no specific interests or passions. So their best route is probably to be an investor. Great. It's your job to analyze the opportunities and deploy your best asset into however is going to best serve you. For some people, all they have is time. So for a while, they're just going to be trading that time for dollars until they find the thing that they want to focus on. And for some people, it's passion. All they want to do is get up in the morning and golf or play video games or whatever they're interested in. All of those opportunities can be monetized. I don't have that one passion, that one thing that I want to do all day. And I think part of the confusion that people get about passion is that they think it has to be found.
Right.
They think that there's one thing outside of themselves that they have to discover. And if they don't discover that one thing, then they're never going to be happy or successful. I am one of those people that doesn't have that. I love baseball. My dream is to own the Cleveland Indians. But after, 162 game season, I'm ready for a break. Now, come December, I'm ready for the season to start again.
Right.
But I think that even I, who am passionate about what I'm doing, don't have the one thing that I could do forever. And so I have more of a feeling that I pursue.
Right.
I have interests that I cultivate. I think passions and interests are cultivated, not discovered. We invest in them, we grow them over time, and it becomes an asset, but it is certainly not the only asset that leads to success.
So would you say, though, that that capitalism is an overarching passion for all these things that you're doing, that's kind of like the driving thing that is constant fuel for all these your respective activities?
I'd say that capitalism is a great word that represents my collective interests.
Yeah.
And I studied economics during the 2008 political election while I was building my first business and the economy was tanking.
Right.
So my interests just happened to be business, politics, economics, and talking. And so capitalism and leading a message of capitalism happens to well represent what I'm doing in the world.
And now, I guess, in your own story as an example, so then you have a liquidation event. You from this business that you created in the way that you just described, how you do it and how you recommend other people do it, and then you pivoted toward investor. Because now investment's a part of what you do. And I think, again, going back to that scenario of somebody like a dentist or somebody in that realm that says, I've been working for a lot of years, I've got really some capital now, and I really don't know how to think like an investor or how to approach, making investments. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so just to complete the point, I think that if you don't have a side thing or a business that is not connected to your time, the first thing you should be investing in is that.
Right.
And if you don't know what that thing is, then the thing you need to be investing in is a skill set that you can take to clients or customers and sell in the marketplace. So whether that is running advertising or it is, I know somebody who charges $20,000 to set up a podcast, right? Because he's one of the best in the world at submitting your podcast to iTunes or whatever,
Right.
whatever it is,
Right.
right? So the first thing is, do you have a skill set that you can take to the marketplace? And for a lot of people, and I've seen this work really well for people, they take their job and they go take a couple side clients and say, this is the result that I get for people. These are the connections that I have from my 20 years of experience working in the corporate world.
Right.
I can bring this to your organization and I'm going to charge you $4,000 a month. And since now that is your side hustle, and that's your first skin in the game to have your first business.
Right.
And if you're building an audience while doing that, getting clients is really easy, or selling product is really easy. I know, for example, I have a friend who's a medical doctor, and this medical doctor puts a lot of content out just on his own personal Facebook page. And on that Facebook page, he talks about inflammation and reducing inflammation and his opinion on inflammation and why it's a problem. I don't know anything about this, but he talks about it at length. Well, one day, just on a whim, he posted on his Facebook page, look, I'm thinking about developing a supplement that would meet my criteria for something I think someone should take or something. And he had about 100 people respond to that. And he started taking deposits for this first product and delivering it in bags, like Ziploc bags, which looked super sketchy, by the way. And he pre-sold 100 units at, I think he sold like a 3-month or 6-month supply for $1,000, right, which funded the build out of the entire business, which he'll now get feedback, blood work from these patients.
Right.
And asterisks, I hope I'm not violating any medical claims by.
I think you're okay so far, and you haven't mentioned any names, so you're good.
Okay. So he'll document their results,
Right.
share them,
Yep.
and now he's off to the races in terms of having a business that he can scale. In the same way, I have a student. Her name is Sophie. She lives in Australia, and she has a little company called Seed and Sprout. And Seed and Sprout sells environmentally friendly kitchenware.
Right.
So that would be she has a reusable containers that are made of like aluminum, or she has reusable bags that she sells, and she developed her first prototype. She ran a Kickstarter, posted it on her personal Facebook page, said, "Here's what I'm up to in the world. This is my prototype. I wanna take this bigger. Can you help?" Her first product was this lunchbox that she sold. And she did $25,000 in pre-orders.
Nice.
She did 3 things well. She posted about it on her personal Facebook page. She went to 10 personal friends who are passionate about the topic and said, "Can you please talk about this on my behalf?" And she went to a couple Facebook groups, so like influential type of Facebook groups that were like 10,000 people.
Right.
And they said, "This is what I'm up to. I'm running a Kickstarter. Can you help?" And one of them said yes. And that cumulative effect from all of those different touch points created $25,000 in pre-orders for a lunchbox.
Wow.
That's enough. That's enough to get the ball rolling. So that's the first thing that you should be investing in if you want to have a side thing.
Right.
From there,
Right.
I think you should be investing 10% of your take-home pay into long-term wealth building assets that you never touch.
What's an example of that?
Yeah, so for me, my favorite is dividend paying stock, which is super unsexy and boring.
Right.
But I love dividend paying stock because they have a double compounding effect. A double compounding effect is some stocks, we call them dividend aristocrats. To give that a Google. That is a term that refers to companies that raise their dividend every year for at least 25 years. A dividend aristocrat. And so if we look at a company that has raised their dividend every year consistently and predictably, there's a compounding effect that happens to that, because year 1 you're getting $1.
Right.
Year 2 you're getting $1.20. Year 3 you're getting $1.40, $1.60, $80, $2 forever and ever. Amen. Hopefully. And so we have a compounding effect that's happening from the raise of the dividend. But I reinvest my dividends into more stock.
Right.
So that creates a second compounding effect. So we're buying more stock, which is giving us more dividends, which is buying more stock, which is buying more dividends. And so we have a snowball that starts to roll. Compounded over 30 years, I'm yet to see any investment on the stock market outpull those numbers.
Right.
Because you get 2 compounding effects compounding against one another. So if someone can show me a better strategy, I would love to see it. I've had this debate with a bunch of financial planners, and my numbers always check out. Of long-term dividend-paying stock outperforming just about anything else in the stock market specifically. Now, with that 10% going to that, the next thing that I do, and again, I'm not recommending any financial advice, but what I do is I take my profits at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, and I'm buying cash flowing assets. A cash flowing asset to me is real estate or real estate syndications or real estate investment trusts. It is, I buy web businesses. My favorite is websites, because a website that profits $1,000 a month almost passively with a few hours a month of maintenance can be sold for $20,000 to $25,000. That's a pretty good deal for somebody who's just looking for an extra $1,000 a month. And there are some interesting tax suggestions that some CPAs will look at and analyze. CPAs, I've talked to several that disagree with one another, but I've heard some very interesting proposals on how you could classify websites as an asset to be more tax efficient, similar to real estate. Real estate, you get certain write-offs. Web properties and web businesses have some similar types of classifications, so it could be very tax efficient income. This would be investing in someone else's business. Right? We're looking for a way to passively be involved in something that is producing cash flow for us. So I like real estate investment trusts, which are publicly traded real estate companies because they pay really high dividends. I like websites because the ROI is just absolutely absurd and they're a sellable asset, and I like investing in businesses. So the first thing is that long-term thing I'm never going to touch. And the second thing is I've now got savings, and I'm going to take that savings and I'm going to try and buy more income with that. But I'm only doing that every quarter or at the end of every year when I have my profits left over from my business.
Right. Is there certain investments that you look at that maybe you'd say, if I were to look at somebody who was a millennial versus someone who's a Gen Xer versus someone who's a baby boomer, depending on the phase of life that you're in, are there certain buckets that they would fit into relative to the type of investments they should be looking at?
Yeah, I think when we're looking at investing, we would prefer that whatever we're investing in, we have some sort of a strategic advantage in. And that could be knowledge, it could be skill set, it could be people that we know. And millennials, stereotypically, are pretty good with social media. So they're going to have insight into what emerging platforms we should pay attention to. So it might be as practical as there's a social media site right now called Twitch, which is emerging and capturing a lot of market share.
Yeah, my son's on it.
Okay, there you go. So if you have a young person who is on the cutting edge of that trend, have them double down on that because they have a strategic advantage over someone who is in an older generation.
Right.
So it's going to take you and me a little bit longer to figure out a brand new social platform than either of our children.
Right.
And they're going to have a little bit of a strategic advantage there. Have them go all in on that. Whereas somebody who is older has the benefit of time and experience. We've seen market cycles. We've seen ups and downs. Whereas right now millennials have lived through only boom times in the last 15 years. Yeah. So what is going to happen when the market has its next pullback? They're probably going to freak out. They're going to overcorrect, oversell. They're going to run for security because they've never had to see it before. Right. But if you're an older person and you've seen ups and downs and you've got some in the bank and you're good, that's a good time to have dry powder to be able to buy up assets. They're going to be incredibly undervalued when we have the next pullback. So where do you have a strategic advantage? Do you have relationships that you can bring to a new investment? So for example, I privately only invest in physical products brands. And the reason for that is because I've made all of my money in physical products brands. I have connections to people in retail. I have connections to influencers who can help incubate a company. I have access to investors who know that that's my skill set and they're throwing money at me. It would be really silly for me to try and pick the next cryptocurrency.
Right.
Because I have no strategic advantage there.
Right.
Now, I have invested in cryptocurrency, as we've discussed, partially to keep myself sharp, even though I don't believe in it as an asset sector, except for one exception. I did invest in one emerging ICO, one cryptocurrency that was brought to me by a personal friend of mine who, as far as I know, is the most connected person in the cryptocurrency space, and he specializes in ICOs and raising money for ones that he personally backs, that he personally invests in, that he personally vets the team and says, these are guys that I believe in. Now, I am not betting on that cryptocurrency. I'm betting on a relationship.
Right.
In the same way, I have investors who invest in me because they're investing in my knowledge and my strategic advantage. So we've all got some sort of strategic advantage, either with people we know, with assets we have, with connections or experience or time. And I would say, depending on what those are, and that's going to largely be determined by your age and experience, that's where you should start looking at where you should invest.
To that point, when you're doing capital raises, I mean, when I was out raising money for one of our ventures, and I'd get in front of the private equity guys, I asked them all the same question, which was, what's the number one thing you look for in an investment? And 100% of the time they said the team. It's the who.
Yeah.
Not, is this a great idea? Of course they have to like the idea, but it's who the person is or who the team is that's going to bring this into reality. So I think you're making a really, really good point here.
I like to say that the answer to almost everything is who.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we think about experiences that made us happy, usually we're thinking about who it was with.
Right.
You can be in the most beautiful place in the world and be around people you don't like, and it's not a good experience.
Right.
Whereas you could be in a small, tiny, rundown dorm room and have the best time ever because
Right.
you're with your best friends.
Right.
And almost everything comes down to who. Success comes down to who. Investments come down to who. Happiness, love, they all come down to who, not what, not how. Those things can be helpful.
Yeah.
When can
Right.
be helpful, but who is ultimately the determining factor.
Yeah, and you talk about the arc of experience, seeing cycles, et cetera. I could tell you when I look back and say, okay, what mistakes did I make over the years, more to the point of the who, was taking opportunity over values. I'd look at certain people I want to put money into or create a partnership with, and it was such a great opportunity, but there wasn't a values match between us. And even the product is a values match. In other words, you're investing in something that's contradictory to your own values. That also can lead to some kind of a problem for you. So I think that's really wise investing advice for people that are out there.
And I have almost the exact same experience.
Yeah. It's not fun, and you want to learn after a while so you don't repeat that one. So, in your experience, what is the timeline expectation or range of timelines to go from I'm starting to getting 1,000 people to follow
90
me?
days.
You said that so quickly that there's more of a formula here than I might understand.
Well,
So take me into it.
it's just experience based on if you're really in it and going for it, it'll probably take you 30 days to have a message hit. One piece of content that impacts enough people, assuming that you are then going to ride that and interact with all of the feedback that comes from that. So if you put out a different message, a different tip, a different strategy, a different piece of advice, a different video, one of them usually stands out and creates 80% of that audience. It's then your job to spend the next 60 days to take that message to as many people as possible. So if I look at all the videos that I've created, I could point to less than 10 that have probably attracted 80% of the business, 80% of the eyeballs, 80% of the attention, 80% of the PR that I've received over the last 10 years as an entrepreneur. I could also pick out 5 podcasts, 5 blog posts, 5 Facebook posts. And what I'll do is when I see something hit, when I know I've got something, if something gets more shares, more likes, more emails, or even better people responding, my ideal people to work with responding to it, I then take that post and I turn it into a video. I then turn that video and we turn it into a blog post. We then turn that blog post, we turn it into a podcast. That same message is going to be distributed to as many people as possible. And what will happen at that point is then we can take that message and roll it out to other podcasts, other YouTube channels, other blogs. So just today, this morning, one of my mentors who has a huge audience noticed that I had tipped my cap to him in one of my videos. And I shared on video a lesson that he had taught me. And he shared that with his audience, right? And so someone else saw that and they clicked the share button. And someone saw that and they clicked the share button. Or one time I had a Facebook post go semi-viral, probably got 100 shares on Facebook or so. And the people who were sharing it were not the people who would usually share my content. They were much higher level individuals. So I was connecting with a really, really good market. So we turned that into a video. It's the most viral video I've ever done.
Wow.
We then took that and we turned it into a podcast, released it on a podcast. And what I noticed was that several other podcasts bigger than mine who had started tuning into my podcast based on one of the other pieces of content I had put out, they took the podcast episode, sent me a message, said, could we share this on our podcast? And so that one message, which was a 6-minute message, started building my audience, doing it one time to many, many people. So a lot of new entrepreneurs will assume that building an audience comes down to putting out as much as possible. And that's true until you find your points that are connecting. Then you go scale those with more media. You go scale those with more relationships. You scale that by distributing it as much as possible. 1,000 people happens as a result in 90 days.
So if you're somebody that says, well, geez, I don't know how to put up all this stuff and to get it implemented. I have something to say, but I don't know how to set up a blog. I'm not sure how to go and
Then
market
don't.
it. So if you can't do it yourself, what should you do?
Either figure it out or choose something that you do understand.
Okay.
And if you're not willing to figure it out, just don't do it. Like seriously, just don't do it. Your message isn't important enough for you. You should pursue another route.
Right.
You should go be an investor, or you should start a business that you do understand. So you have to understand enough to be able to evaluate those results. Otherwise, you're just wasting money. And you probably, whatever you're thinking about doing probably isn't that important to you.
So now we're talking about content. My other question was, I have content, but I don't know how to program a page. I don't know how to set up opt-ins. I don't know how to, what list management do I use, et cetera. These are a lot of just the fundamentals that people really need to understand. Your advice is go to work and study it and figure it out and then go once you do, or don't bother. Now you're saying, okay, well, I'm trying to figure out content. You said just open up your phone. So where were you going with that particular idea?
So once again, we're talking about building audiences, right? And I think building audiences is a superpower to have that first side thing that produces thousands of dollars a month, or your first $1 million, or gives you the acceleration point to sell a product.
Right.
And so that's the context with which we're talking. I don't think it's 100% necessary that everybody is producing videos on the internet. I don't even think it's necessary per se to do this in order to build a business. I do think it's necessary for there to be some sort of audience in order to make any product hit. Now, it doesn't have to be you being the face of it. It could be videos that someone else makes and you're testing different messages. It could even be just sponsoring other people's audiences. For example, if you didn't want your company or you as a person to do any content distribution at all, just go pay the people who are doing it to adjust their message to talk about you.
Right.
And that's called influencer marketing. And the ROI on that is absurd when done well and very poor when done poorly. But if you have people who are aligned with your values, your mission, and your products, it can be very, very lucrative in a way to put a business or a message or product on the map. Now, if you are going to be that person that is distributing a message, it's your job to experiment with what messages hit. And everybody hates it at the beginning. Everybody. I'll tell you a quick story. I was on a plane preparing to give a keynote, and I opened up my laptop to work on the keynote, and my internal noise said, man, who wants to listen to me talk about business and entrepreneurship? And I was talking about what we're talking about right now, and I felt like I had nothing to add to this crowd. And all of a sudden, my internal noise started to come in. And so I said, okay, well, that's interesting. I guess I'll start with that. And so I went on stage and I said, I opened up my laptop to share this with you, And I felt like I had nothing to share because we are all battling this internal voice in our head that says we're not good enough, that says we have nothing to share.
Right.
And I just want you to know that it's easy for you to sit in the crowd and look at the people on stage like they have some sort of special ability, and I don't. I'm just a normal guy who figured out a few habits that created some success for me. And at no point do I want you to put me on a pedestal just because I'm a few feet above you and I'm delivering this because I feel like I'm one of you, and I've been sitting in the crowd many times, idolizing the people on stage, not knowing that they had their insecurities too. So you're gonna feel that come up when I'm sharing what worked for me. And I want you to know that you're just as good as me. I'm just maybe a year ahead in terms of my skill set. With that, let's start going.
Yeah.
And it was the best part, the most well-received part of the entire keynote. It was because all of a sudden it was a feeling that we gave to them of a freedom and an ease around permission of feeling inadequate. And when I just connected in that way and shared what was exactly on my mind, that connected with the rest of the audience. So it's not your job to figure out what to say. It's your job to share what is true for you and what you've learned over your years of being in whatever field you're in and seeing what connects. And every time I try to figure it out here, it sucks.
Yeah.
And every time I just deeply connect and share something that's meaningful, there are other people for whom it's meaningful too.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people that have this sort of secret identity, especially people who are on the platforms, right? And that's what you basically took the mask off and let them see, what's real. But when I'm advising entrepreneurs, I basically tell them, the characterization I use based on the presentation I do is called, you got to find your Miles Davis. In other words, it's what's most purely you inside and let that out. And be vulnerable in that process because, the people who are the right people to be attracted to you are going to bond with you for the right reasons.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of individuals are being something that they're not in order to impress people that they don't want to hang out with anyway.
Right.
And I've played that game before, and I did not find it enjoyable. And at some point you say, what do I really want my life to be like? Because it does come down to who. Yeah. Who do I really want to spend my time with? And if I got $10 million or I got $100 million, would I want to spend time with these people? And if the answer is no, we might need to make some adjustments on our life decisions.
No question. And you are who you hang out with, so who are you around? And that's really what you're aspiring to. I remember some years ago I had done some programs with Deepak Chopra, and one of the things he said to me that I just thought was kind of profound in the realm of what you're saying is that he said, we buy things we don't want with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And it's funny because of how true it really, really was. So I love that you got up on a platform and basically just had no mask on and just said, here's who I am and here's what we're going to talk about.
I think often we're looking for where the strategy or the formula is that'll create a certain result. And so we become a reflection of what we think will produce a certain result. And what I've discovered is that I've got a monopoly on one thing, and it's being Ryan Daniel Moran. And I'm the best in the world at being Ryan Daniel Moran. I suck at a lot of things, but I'm really good, the best in the world at being Ryan Daniel Moran. It also happens to be when I'm happiest.
Yeah.
And so the more that I can be myself, and apologetically so, the happier I am, and the more I attract people that I want to work with, which allows me to charge higher prices. And which allows me to be more in my zone of genius, which allows me to give better results for my clients and my customers, which allows me to spread a message deeper and wider and allows me to charge higher speaking fees. And all of a sudden I make more money the more true I am and the more honest I am to myself and to other people. So if nothing else, I got a monopoly on being myself. And we all do. You're the best in the world at it. So the more you can be that, the more money you end up making.
So you were earlier talking about a blueprint and saying, there was kind of like, I think, kind of the stage one of the blueprint. Is there some additional dimensions of that you can share?
Yeah, so when we've got some sort of a distribution method, and that would be 1,000 people following us. It might be the ability to put a product on Amazon.com, because now with Amazon's distribution centers, literally anybody can have a seller account on Amazon. You can Google Amazon FBA account. You can set one up for like $40, and you can sell products on Amazon.com. You could have a email list that is responsive, which means you can sell physical products or webinars or consulting. Once you have the distribution mechanism, it takes 3 to 5 products selling 30 units a day at a $30 price point to have about $1 million business. So that's the first stage of it, is having the one product that you release to enough customers where you say, I think I might have something here. And that just requires you asking your audience, would you want something? Just like my doctor friend who said, I'm thinking about doing this. I need 100 people to fund the whole thing. Would anybody want it? And he had 100 people say yes. And so he didn't go to a manufacturer and develop this whole big wonky wonk system. He said, would anybody want it? All right, are you willing to pay for it? And they paid for it. And as a result, he was able to fund the development of that business.
And that's win then play, rather than spend a bunch of money and find out if you got something.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can get your mistakes out of the way with people who wanted to be first in line.
Right.
So that's step one. That is like stage 1A. And then when you have something, it's regularly distributing it to the rest of the audience. You had 100 people go through it. Now can we release it to more people? And when that snowball starts to roll, we can roll out product number 2, product number 3, and on until we have $1 million business or more. When we have a few products working, it's our job to start going out to other audiences. And that's when people know you enough for you to be able to have some sort of authority to get on other people's podcasts, for you to be communicating to other blogs and on other YouTube channels. That's when influencers start to pick you up. It's when you bring on other team members who have other skill sets. And that's when you can really start to scale something beyond $1 million if that's what you want to do.
Really interesting. For me, the way that you've organized this in your thinking and presentation is demystifying a lot of it, and also putting it into bite-sized chews, right? So that it's like, this is the chunk, you get to this level, then this is the next one. And you're also, I think, mitigating risk, because you're not spending a ton of time and money until there's certain milestones that are checked off. So it looks like far-sight simplicity. And it seems simple now, but there had to be a complexity arc and a lot of learning to get you there, I'm assuming.
Well, what I think this does is it gives people permission to get started.
Yeah.
Because it removes all of the heaviness and the risk around trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite.
Right.
And if we realize that we can test things before we get too involved, that gives us permission to say, all right, I'll experiment. And we realize that the downside when we're just playing for a while is very low. Whereas most people, and I'd say 80% of my work with entrepreneurs is getting them to stop overthinking it.
Right.
And that is that they're here, they want to go here, and they say, how do I get here?
Right.
And what I tell them is, we got to get to the first step. Like that's what we have. This is the only thing we need. We cannot get here without getting here first. And so all I need to do is get them to take that first step, and then the second step and the third step. Whereas most people think about the marathon the whole time. And we can run a marathon, but we can't run a marathon without taking the first step. And so when we distill down what it would take to get some skin in the game, all of a sudden it doesn't seem so scary.
Any other considerations for people who are looking to create side hustle? You know, they basically say, I've got a decent career, I want to create more, I'm willing to give time, money, energy to be able to create something more. Any other cases about people who've done this that you think might be valuable, or other ideas beyond what you've already stated that might?
Well, one thing that I'll say is, I would not recommend getting into anything unless you are willing to commit to it for a year. I take a rule that I don't evaluate any result until I've been into something for a year. And sometimes it's simply putting out enough videos, knowing I want to see what will hit, but I won't know for a year. And I might test doing 30 videos over 30 days and decide I don't enjoy it.
Right.
But I still won't evaluate the result until I've had a year to see if one of them caught on. And I have had that happen where a video was a dud, and then 6 months later, someone picked it up and it became a viral sensation. I have had that happen. And we won't know that for a year. I've had that happen with podcasts. I've had it happen with products where you were too early on a product and then a year later all these customers flooded in.
Right.
So I'm not saying you have to work at something for a year.
Right.
But we have to wait at least a year to be able to evaluate any result as possible at all. So if you're not willing to wait a year for the result, you probably don't want to be in that thing. Mm-hmm. And that allows us to say no to a lot of things that we probably won't enjoy doing. And so if you're willing to wait a year, then we can backtrack. Okay, what are we going to enjoy doing for the next year? Mm-hmm. Or how can we orchestrate our lives so that we're in a position to enjoy it for the next year while we evaluate the result?
Well, there's a ton of wisdom in that, because I think that's another thing when you're coming to this new. What expectations should I have?
Yeah.
So many of the things that are sold out there to teach you how to do this, it's like, lack of a better phrase, get rich quick, or, overnight results, et cetera, testimonials. But really, there has to be some sort of a timeline. And one of the things, talk about, a lot of experience, perseverance used to be one of my core values. So on the other side of that equation, now I say perseverance is a virtue until it isn't. I have sunk millions of dollars into ventures over a period of protracted time, pushing a rock up the hill because I don't give up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, after I've done that a couple of times, I'm realizing now my value is, how do I fail fast? How do I find out, as compared to torture myself for a long period of time?
Yes.
So on the one side, you're saying you can't really measure results for a year, which I think is really good wisdom. And then the other side, at what point do you find out maybe this is not the right message or the right message to market match?
When you stop enjoying it. I have a mentor named Travis, mm-hmm. who reminds me to ask myself the question, what would I be doing even if I was failing my ass off? Mm-hmm. I heard the story once of Jerry Seinfeld, who is either a billionaire or close to being a billionaire. Right. A comedian that's a billionaire. That doesn't happen.
Right.
He says that when he first started, if he could just pay for dinner based on what he made from comedy, that was like amazing to him. Mm-hmm. And it made me think, what's that thing that I'd be stoked if I just got enough to pay for dinner?
Right.
And I don't have that thing. I don't have that passion. I'm more of a feeling I pursue. Mm. I have a way of life that I like to pursue. I pursue excitement. Mm-hmm. So how do I get paid to live in that place? Right. And so what that requires me to do is anything that doesn't move me closer to that, I say no to. Mm-hmm. And I went to my team recently and I said, all right, the one thing in our business, if it's built around me, if it requires me, then I've got to be pursuing excitement. So right. From now forward, the primary question, if we're going to pursue anything new, is does this make me excited or does this not make me excited? Mm-hmm. And if it does, we'll say yes to it. And if we go, well, it'll make a lot of money and money's exciting. Mm-hmm. No, because I know I'm going to burn out on that.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's not a good financial move in the short run. Mm-hmm. It just means that I'm going to end up burning out, which means I'm probably not going to create what I want to create to get the result that I want evaluating a year back. Mm-hmm. There's two things that I learned early in life from my Uncle Tom that he shared with me that became very good business and investing advice. The first was spend your money on things that people can't take away from you. Mm-hmm. At the time I was learning guitar, mm-hmm. and he said they can take your guitar, but they can't take away your knowledge of how to play guitar.
Right.
And experiences, connections, relationships, these are all things that no one can take away from you. Mm-hmm. And when you're starting as an entrepreneur, when you're starting a new business, when you're going a new direction in life, spend your time and your money on things that people can't take away from you.
Great advice.
We have to have some sort of a skill set. We have to have some sort of value that we're creating in the world. Mm-hmm. So when you're a new entrepreneur, mm-hmm. when you're new to the game, mm-hmm. when you're pursuing a new life, the first thing is to invest in things that people can't take away from you. Mm-hmm. That's skill sets, it's education, it's relationships, and those are the things that are going to have the highest ROI in your business mm-hmm. when you are first starting out. And then the other thing that Uncle Tom taught me was, as an investor, the thing that I look for, and he was looking for and passed on to me, was 1% per month. Mm-hmm. That's our target range for a profitable investment. We're not looking for home runs. We're looking for lots and lots of singles and doubles, 1% per month. If that's a $100,000 investment, it means I want to be making at least $1,000 a month from that $100,000. And if I can't get that at some point in the future, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity where I will be able to get that. If what I'm looking for is cash flow, then 1% per month is my target. That's where I evaluate my deals.
So all great wisdom and I think very actionable, as far as what you're communicating here. It's not just abstract, it's really actionable stuff. So I really appreciate you sharing this with me. Any final thoughts in these realms before we tie up?
Ultimately, we don't get rich trading our hours for dollars.
Right.
We get rich producing value in the marketplace. It's why capitalism is the most beautiful system in the world. It's the only system through which we're actually compensated for the value that we bring. And I'm so saddened by the mindset of waiting for somebody else to tell us what we're worth in the form of minimum wage, or hoping that somebody else does something in order to help us get ahead. Like, if you want to get ahead, you bring new value to the marketplace. You learn new skills, you develop new relationships, and you bring those to the company that you work in or to customers and clients who are willing to pay you more than what you're getting at your job. It is always about what other people are willing to pay. And something that has really helped me recently is shifting from thinking about what can I get out of this to how can I create and how can I give. And not only how can I give, but who can I give to? Because sometimes the problem and the thing that's holding us back is not you and it's not your product, it's just the person that you're marketing it to. So an idea or a service, the same one can be worthless to one person and worth $10,000 a month to somebody else. Same person. So sometimes just changing the person that you are speaking to is enough to go from failure to millionaire, just because of who values it. Value is subjective. Value is person to person. And when we're not getting the results that we want, it just means that we need to adjust our positioning in the marketplace, either what we're providing or who we're providing it to. And these things are always changeable. They're always hackable. None of it is stagnant. It's constantly changing. It forces us to be on our edge, be on our best, to be always moving forward and growing. And so this free society that we all want literally forces us to be better every day.
Great stuff. Thanks for being such a great champion of capitalism. And,
My pleasure.
And sharing all this passion with this audience. I really believe you delivered a lot of value today, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
As much as I love people who have been around for a long time and the wisdom that they bring with them, there's something also about young minds, fresh, energized, out there in the marketplace making big things happen, and that's what Ryan Moran brought to the table. It was great to be with him. I enjoyed that interview, and I hope you did too. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, thanks for being here with me. That completes Episode 5 of Money Revealed 2020. What a journey it's been so far, and we are not even close to being done. There's a lot more coming, so make sure you keep your discipline, keep your rhythms, watch Episode 6, 7, 8, 9, follow the whole thing through. You're going to be glad you did. This is information that truly pays off, and I mean literally pays off. If you want to own this, you can. During the free viewing period, which we're in right now, we have great packages that are available for you with phenomenal bonuses. Check those things out if you haven't already. And if you have invested already, thank you. We really appreciate it. It supports our work, helps us keep going. So if you're the person that already made the move to own Money Revealed 2020, you have my sincere appreciation. Thank you, and I'll see you in Episode 6.
Let's just say if I had $1 million in cash or $100,000 to invest, what would I put that in right now? It would probably be 50% cash, 20% gold, and then the rest in crypto. The asymmetric return opportunity for crypto is something that you would be silly to miss out on, even if it's just 2, 3, 4, 5% of your portfolio. Anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen next with the stock market or with money is giving you their best guess, and you need to understand that it is nothing other than a guess.
Opportunity is everywhere. We live in a society now, not everyone, but so many people don't want to work for it. So many people want that instant gratification. No one wants to put in the time, the effort, the grind, the hustle, the extra hours to achieve their goals and be willing to sacrifice. Unfortunately, we live in a country where people don't want to sacrifice.
I had this opportunity to host the first public speech of Steve Jobs after he was fired from Apple.
Wow.
And so a lot of folks don't appreciate, but Steve had scaled in his 20s a company 8x.
Wow.
That of what Bill Gates had, same age. We talk about in our book that there are 4 components: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And the question always is, which one of those is more important? All 4 matter equally. It's like a table with 4 legs. If you're missing one of them, it's just not going to be as stable. But he found a 5th that trumped them all. I even went back and re-edited my book because I had missed that. And it was market timing.